Hey everyone, welcome to another session of the Strategy Supper Club. This week we are talking about the nuts and bolts of freelancing. When I first started freelancing about 10 years ago, I knew how to do strategy, but I didn't know how to do anything else. I didn't know how to do contracts, I didn't know how to do day rates, I didn't know how to do project fees, I didn't know the difference between a W-9 and a 1099. And in this Strategy Supper Club, we talk about all of it. We talk about how you can best set yourself up to kill it in freelancing. So I hope this session is really useful to people. I know there's a lot of people out there that are new to the freelance game, so we hope that this came at a good time. As ever, if you have any questions at all, hit me up on Twitter, email me. I love to talk about this stuff, and I hope to see you at a session soon. Okay, let's talk about the 101s of freelancing. This is a very nuts and bolts strategy supper club today. We're going to get into things like Roth IRAs and stuff like that. It's going to be super exciting and super fun. But this is super important because as we are living in this ever-changing world and all these structures are breaking down, agency model, we've been talking about it forever, but my God, this is like continuing the death knell for the traditional agency model. It just means that we all start to navigate like badasses, because this idea of like locking into a company and staying with it for a really long time, although there still will be people that are doing that. We have been going towards a freelance model for a long time for a lot of workers, and this is just accelerating it. So how do you be a badass freelancer? How do you navigate it in a way that feels really good to you? You're doing the kind of work that you want to do. You're getting paid the right way. This is what we're going to be talking about today. So there are three sections that we have today. The first one is marketing yourself, then it's all about the money, and then it's how do you show up as a freelancer versus how you potentially show up in a full-time context. So let's jump into marketing. Okay, so congratulations, you are now a brand. Hopefully for brand strategists, this shouldn't be too intimidating, but it's just as much about the nuts and bolts of what's on your LinkedIn as to the vibe and the energy and the ideas that you put out into the world. So I would really just encourage you to embrace that brand and think hard about how that brand is different and how that brand communicates, much in the same way that we work on every other brand that we get hired to put our expertise towards. And I think one big clue in this is how we can differentiate ourselves from other brand strategists is really helping people help you and having a really great story so that people can help you more. So some of you have participated in this. I've been chatting with a lot of different strategists in the industry for the last 5 or 6 weeks. I think I've talked to like 50 or 60 people, different brand strategists, slightly different backgrounds, different geographies, different ways of coming into the discipline. And there really is a difference between somebody that comes to those chats and is there to help me understand who they are quickly and how I can deploy them versus other people. And I've not only figured this out with the chats that I've been doing or seen this with the chats I've been doing, but my first company that I started, Wolf and Wilhelmina, we had an agency structure that we called a blob with a spine. And what we meant by that is that we had a spine of full-time employees that understood the culture, understood how we did things, understood our clients pretty well. But it was really important to us at W&W that we brought in the oxygen that came from freelancers and free agents colliding with my full-time staff. And so the blob was this group of people that we deployed on different projects to keep things fresh in the company. And throughout that time, I worked with a lot of different freelancers and saw the ways that they could either pitch themselves or not. And then I've also been a freelancer myself. I dropped out of the industry proper when I was 31 years old. So that was like 10 years ago. And for about a year and a half, 2 years, I freelanced. And now I would say that I'm consulting, but I'm also in this idea as well of like, I'm trying to get people to hire me. And so what I've learned in this is when you help people help you, you get a lot more gigs a lot more quickly. So let's talk about how that works. The first thing that I would really recommend everyone do is know your T. So in brand strategy or in any skill set, we're going to talk about brand strategy specifically, but I know there's people that are on this today that aren't brand strategists. There are certain skills that are core to the work that you do. So in a brand strategist, like we should know how to write a creative brief. We should know how to do a competitive audit. We should know how to write a discussion guide. We should know how to work with a research vendor. These are all those core skills that we build up over time. But if you're doing your job with your eyes open, which I know everyone on this call is, you start to realize that there are things that you are particularly good at. There are things that you enjoy doing more than the other core skills. There are things that you get known for doing, and that's your special sauce. And this is the idea of the T, that you have the base of everything. It's like an upside down T. You have the base of everything that you need to do your job. And of course you can write a discussion guide. Of course you can deal with a client. Of course, click, 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 got it, got it, got it. But then your T are these particular skills that you love, and you are a rock star. And that's what people should hire you for. So I really encourage anyone that's going into freelancing to, of course, continue to build your core skills, but also be able to tell the story of how you are special. Now, let me give you a hint. In the last few weeks, as I've been doing these strategy chats, when I ask a lot of people, like, what do I hire you for? What makes you special? Like, what do you do? Most people are saying, I'm really great at telling brand stories. And I would say about 80% of the people that I've talked to say that that's the thing that they're all about. It's not that special if 80% of the people are saying it, right? So another thing you just have to be aware of is, how is your T different than what other people are saying in the marketplace? And really think about the differentiation. In my career, my T changed by era. So when I was in my 20s and I was interviewing, because I was in full-time jobs then, people would say to me, like, what's your thing? And I'd be like, yes, I can do all the brand strategy stuff, but the thing you really hired me for is that I'm a street strategist. You can throw me in any market with any culture, and if I just spend, a day or two walking the streets, hanging out with people, spending time in people's homes, I will understand the target market in a really nuanced and interesting way. That is my special sauce. When I hit my 30s and I was properly freelancing, and I would interview with heads of planning, because I was freelancing in agencies at that point, they'd say, what do we hire you for? And the thing I would say is, you hire me to run teams. I am really good at coming in and working with multidisciplinary teams, getting all the people to work together, all the pieces to work together, and to deliver the product that the client needs. Now that I'm in my 40s, my T is a little bit different. My spike now is, I'm really great at working with founders, CEOs, people who are in executive leadership positions, because I've run companies before. I've built teams. I've managed cultures. I've built brands. I deeply understand what senior leadership goes through when they're trying to navigate through the world. And I'm a really good partner to these senior leaders. So your T can actually change by era. But the most important thing is that you know your T. Okay, we spent a lot of time on T, but it's really important. We're going to go a little bit faster through the rest of the slides. Once you have your T, super important to slay your 60-second story. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that they waste 80% of the time I have with them by telling me the rundown of their LinkedIn. I can read your LinkedIn. I'm actually more interested in the story of your career journey. What motivates you? Why did you make certain decisions? Why did you move from one job to another? I don't need you to rattle off what I can read. So make sure you have that 60-second, maybe 4-minute story. You probably get 4 minutes to say it, really tight about what you're about as a freelancer and what you're about as a professional. That being said, even though I just kind of slagged off LinkedIn a little bit, LinkedIn's super important. So make sure it's cleaned up and make sure it's sharp. Make sure it leans into the T and it's communicating the story of what makes you different and special. Because honestly, folks, we've seen it all over the place, especially in the last month or so. The market is flooded right now with brand strategists. There are so many brand strategists on the market. So you've got to make sure that your T is coming through a very beautifully cleaned up LinkedIn. And then finally, work that network. Now, I am the last person in the world that wants to go to a networking thing. I freaking hate classic networking, the way that we think about it, from like let's get a cocktail, let's exchange cards. It's awful, right? But all of us through the course of our career have met people. We've worked well with people. We've intersected with people. And it's not always the people that we automatically think of can do something for us. It's not always the senior people. It's not always the clients. Networks are lateral as well. Networks go deep, people that have worked for you. Whenever I'm starting something new, putting myself in the market, starting to freelance again, I send an email to all the people that I know think I'm great. And I tell them, this is what I'm doing. This is what you hire me for. This is how I can really kick ass. Because you never know when somebody's sitting at a dinner somewhere and someone's like, oh, I need someone to help me do X, Y, and Z. And they're like, I know somebody. I know that person. So make sure that everyone in your life knows what you're up to and knows what value you can bring to the table. Okay, so that's marketing in a nutshell. Now let's have some fun. Let's go to money. So most people, when it comes to money, this is usually the reaction that I get. People don't want to talk about it. It stresses them out. It freaks people out. If you are freelancing, you need to get over it because you are your own business manager now. You are your own CFO, and you have to have your money on lock. So the first thing that we do when we're freelancers is I tell every single person that starts to go into freelancing is know your house. Maybe your house is a cottage. Maybe you don't need much to live. Maybe your overhead isn't that high. Maybe you're a castle person. Maybe you need a lot of money every month to be happy. I don't care what it is, just know it. Know your monthly budget, know how much money you have to have coming in. Because when you have that security or that deep knowledge of like this is what it takes to be Heidi from month to month, then down the road you can negotiate that much more strongly. The next thing you need to know is your day rate. Now, and those day rates can get extrapolated into hourly rates or project fees, however you want to do it. We can talk more about in the discussion if people want to hear more about that. I roughly put down day rates here. What I would really recommend you do is check out the planner survey, the annual planner survey that Heather Lefevre puts out. Heather Lefevre, go find it. I don't think she's done it for a couple of years, but there was a good like 10-year period where every year Heather sent out a survey to brand strategists and planners and said, where do you live? What kind of work do you do? How much money do you make? It was all anonymous, but it really put an amazing like lens on how much money you can expect to make at your level and in what market you're working in. So go find that. This is kind of a rough estimation of what I think of when I think of ranges for different levels of strategy. But again, go check out Heather's work as well. It's a better resource than I am. Okay. Then when you start to get paid, a lot of times, especially if you're working through agency, I think it's only if you're working through agency, they're going to ask you, do you want to get paid W-9 or 1099? The difference, W-9, it looks like a normal pay stub. They take out your taxes. 1099, they don't take out your taxes. So if you're doing 1099, all of that money that's coming in is not yours. 30 to 40% of it is for Uncle Sam. So make sure you're keeping that straight in your head and you're setting that money aside. Which leads to my next point. I'm not your mom, but something I would recommend is that you do have separate accounts, especially if you're getting paid 1099. I always have a separate bank account that's called taxes. And as soon as those 1099 payments come in, that money goes over to the other account. And if you are able to, at the very least, feed your Roth. And again, not a financial advisor. There's plenty of information on the internet here. But my sister is a financial person and she has been harping at me in my retirement account ever since I was a young girl. So I would be remiss if I didn't say, make sure you are thinking about the long term as well as the short term when you're thinking of your budgets, your overhead, and the money that you need to put away. Okay, mom moment over. And the maxim for this section when it comes to money is you have to assume the worst, especially when you're dealing with contracts and you're dealing with people that are supposed to be paying you. And I know this is kind of like a crappy way to start an assignment. It may even feel like inappropriate because you've just pitched to get yourself on a project and everyone's excited and the energy is good. And now you need to hammer out the contract. Don't worry about it. Advocate for yourself, because if you don't make sure that certain things are sorted out ahead of time and laid out in writing, then you might get screwed later on. And unfortunately, I've been in a position a couple of times, not that many times, where I haven't gotten paid or people paid me less than we agreed to. And thank God that I went through some of this process I'm about to take you through, because I did get paid eventually. And this is how I did. So the things you have to hammer out when you're entering a contract with an agency or a client, there are core questions. What's the scope? This is super important. What are the deliverables? What are the timeline? And what fee are you going to get paid to do all this stuff? The next thing you want to hammer out is when you get paid. A lot of times agencies won't pay you until they get paid by their clients. And a lot of times clients are either on net 30, net 45, net 60, sometimes net 20 terms. So sometimes an agency, well, if they don't pay you until they get paid, you might invoice them. They might get paid by the client, say 45 days later. The agency themselves may have a net 30 terms in theirs, and then you don't get paid till 75 days after the initial invoice. So make sure you are getting super clear with companies as to how that cascade works for them and how and when you're going to get paid. The next is how you get paid, W-9, 1099, what accounts, things like that. That's kind of nuts and bolts. And then the one thing that you want to get ahead of is starting to poke around of what happens in the event if there's a delay or a scope change, just so you understand like where they stand if the project stretches out, or conversely, where they understand where you stand if a project stretches out. So for example, at W&W, we used to give clients a 2-week grace period over a scoping, where if the project slid by 2 weeks, we're like, okay, fine, it happens. But once the project started sliding past 2 weeks, then we instituted a weekly fee on top of our fee for the time that we were spending towards their projects. So you can put things in place like this if you have the conversations up front. Now, it's also good to get an idea of who you're working into, how do they expect you to communicate, how do they expect you to work, where they expect you to work, although the where isn't as important anymore, and how they expect you to interface with the clients. But the things you really need to get in writing are those core questions. Do not fail to get those in writing. And one of the big things in this is get comfy with negotiating. I remember when I first started freelancing, I was freelancing for an agency. They were great. I talked to the head of planning, and we talked about like how I was going to come on. We talked about the project I was going to work on, the scope, deliverables. We talked about my day rate. And then he said, great, I'm going to turn you over to the head of HR. When I got to the head of HR, she was trying to cut my day rate. And actually, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we're business people, we're negotiating. I'm a business person. I negotiate all the time. If someone gives me a fee, I will go back with a counter fee, hoping that I can get some money off of it. It's not an insult. But the thing that really struck me the first time I did it, I was like, I got like really flustered, and I started to act like these foxes. I started to feel like I wasn't being valued, that I was being undercut, that they didn't really want me. All these really weird narratives started in my head, when actually at the end of the day, they're just negotiating because we're in business. So when you think about negotiating, don't channel the fox energy as much as you channel the Beyonce energy. Like, advocate for yourself, be strong, but also be joyful and be confident in yourself that like they want you there. Negotiating is just a part of the product, but part of the process. And then finally, the number one rule is get it in writing. So if you agree to scope, deliverables, fee, any of the stuff I talked about, you have to get it in writing. Sometimes what happens is I will have a verbal conversation with somebody about what we agree to the parameters of the project are. Within an hour, I write them an email. Just want to recap everything we talked about and agreed to. Can you please respond and let me know you agree with this? And you've got to get that email that says agree. The reason why you've got to get this stuff is that if at any point they don't pay you the way they say they're going to, they start to treat you badly, the scope slips, whatever, if you have it in writing, you can lawyer up. And no one really wants to lawyer up. Like, agencies don't want to deal with lawyers. Like, they're going to deal with you. Like, they're going to take care of it if like they're starting to be shitty to you. But even just knowing that you have it in writing is going to keep them on their toes. So make sure you get full contracts, full agreements in writing. And then be ready to invoice. I'm not going to go too deeply over this. Invoicing is not a complicated document. There are plenty of templates online. It's super simple. The first time I invoiced, I was like, oh my God, it has to be this big official thing. It really doesn't. The only thing I want to note here is that you write a short description of what the invoice is for. And I'm serious, like sometimes it is a short description. It is like competitive audit or strategic services. Usually my description is 2 to 5 words is the amount of the description I'll put on an invoice. Okay, the last part, and then we're gonna get to discussion, and I'm gonna stop talking. I'm really excited to hear what people have to think and ask, is showing up. Because showing up as a freelancer is a lot different than showing up for a full-time agency gig. Here are some of the big differences that I feel. One is that when you're in an agency or you're in a full-time position, a lot of times there's a lot of warm, fuzzy, cultural team building kind of stuff, and you're a part of this team effort. When you're a freelancer, not really. You're not participating in that stuff. That's not why you're there. Another thing that happens when you're working full-time somewhere is that you have a manager that cares about your growth and should care about your growth, I should say, and is helping you navigate your career, helping you navigate projects, helping you navigate how to be very successful in the position that you're in. When you're freelancing, no, you don't really have that. You cannot expect that kind of attention from the person that you are working for or reporting into. The final thing that happens a lot when you're inside of a company is that your manager will purposely stretch you. They will put you on things that they know you don't quite know how to do yet, but because they know your abilities intimately and they're going to surround you with help, they will push you and kind of throw you into the fire. They will kind of expect you to fake it till you make it. Can you do that in freelancing? Hell no. No, you cannot walk in and say, I know how to do this thing, and actually not know how to do it. Your reputation as a freelancer will be in tatters. So please don't do that. When you are freelancing, my supper club maxim for this is you really need to embrace and be an assassin. You need to get in there. You need to grab that assignment. You need to wrestle it to the ground. You need to deliver things that are really helpful. You need to not cause any political ripples inside of the company, unless, the company's in a total asshole, but you know what I mean? Like, don't go create drama inside the company that's unnecessary. You just need to get in there, get it done, and get out. These are the kinds of freelancers that companies love. People hire freelancers because they have something really specific that they need help with. And if you go in with that assassin mentality, that I'm going to go in and get that thing done, you're going to be great in the marketplace. A second thing to think about is when you're freelancing, you also have to be captain of your own growth. You do not have the managers saying, here's your growth plan. Here's how you need to be thinking about your next steps. I would advocate getting a coach or getting a mentor. I have both of those things. I use them a lot, but figure out a way that you are going to chart your own growth, because you're not going to get it from the places that you are working. Okay, that is what I have for today. I would love to hear thoughts, questions. I'm going to stop sharing and open it up to the room.
How do you know freelance is kind of the move or like the next step you want to get into? I guess are there like symptoms of that you see throughout your career, or is like a personality thing? So I'm just
Burnout.
curious.
Burnout. But also, like, there's no shame if you go to freelancing because you've gotten fired, right? Like, I've gotten fired. There's no shame in getting fired, right? A lot of times getting fired is the universe telling us we need to be somewhere else. But I think when you are, when you are taking the shift out of agency into freelance, for me, for most people, it's burnout. They're tired of, at the end of the day, like, I think of agencies as bands. So you have like the big bands, like the Gray McCann BBDO band. And then you have the medium band, which is the Droga, 72 and Sunny, Wyden, BBH, Mother band. And then you have like the bunch of small shops, right? Like, I kind of think of them in bands like that. And one of the things that blew my mind when I was freelancing was that when I was younger, I always thought it was just about finding your agency home, right? And that you would find this place and that like it would be unique and different, and like that's the place you stay. And then when I started freelancing and hopping through the shops pretty quickly, I realized it's a lot of the same people, it's a lot of the same processes, it's a lot of the same stuff, right? And I just kind of grew tired of it. And I wanted to have more control over my schedule. I wanted to have more control over sleep. I wanted to have more control over the kinds of clients that I was working on. I think the thing that I really wanted the most control over were the teams that I was working on. Because a lot of times when agencies staff a project, it's about who has bandwidth versus who's right for the project. And I find that to be quite exhausting, right? So it's really about having that autonomy. And a lot of people reach a point in their career where they're like, I don't want to, fuck it. I don't want to work like this anymore, because it is an industry that wrings you out. The way that agencies are set up so people make money is that you have a lot of cheap talent in your 20s, and then you have a couple of figureheads who are making a shit ton of money, right? And the younger talent is getting booked out at 100 to 200% and getting worked pretty hard, right? And then they're not making a ton of money, and then the people at the top are making a lot of money, right? And there's at one point I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I feeding someone else? Why am I paying for someone else's Hamptons home? So I think they're just a fatigue sets in. But I'd be really interested, Adrienne. You were 20 years in, you went freelance. Like, if anyone else, why did you drop out? Why did you leave?
I was part of a big layoff in March, and I was completely shocked. And so I had been doing freelance on the side just from having different chapters of my life and, my friends, but I always had an agency job. And like, based on where my life stage is, meaning I'm a mom with a kid and we're not moving cities. And before, I've been afforded to live in Miami, New York, and Chicago. So like, it hasn't sucked. It's been amazing. But I'm not right now. We're in lockdown and I've got a mortgage to pay. So my mindset and life stage are different. And so that security of an agency is, to me, it's evaporated. Like, I don't think I'll ever see it again. So that's why this crossroads of like health insurance is important.
Oh yeah, I forgot about health insurance.
All these other things are important. But to your point, like, it is the kick in the butt that I needed. And as I've been saying, I got kicked out of jail. So I am trying to use my running away from not running away, but getting kicked out of jail. I really would like to use this bizarre time to really get me where I want to go, which is coming in and out, not being a neck to choke. And if I'm getting paid to be a neck to choke, to your point, you know what you're going to pay me for. And I'm not going to pretend that I can't do anything. The one thing I will say is, though, it is not a moment to fake it till you make it, because to your point of like, you are at this point, to Heidi's point, a brand. So like, I will never tell anybody I am a business planner. I am not. I can help you understand the math. I can research it to death. I can do everything else. But if you are paying me for business strategy, you have so got the wrong girl. And I will own that like all day long. But it's interesting because when I've interviewed with clients for freelance jobs in the last few months, they're like, so you don't blah, blah, blah. I was like, no. And you will hate me. I will hate you. Like, this is not, like, you have to just own your shit. Like, which is why the website is really helpful in going through that exercise. Cause I'm like, I can't do this without having a digital strategist or a comms planner or whatever it is. Cause I'm like, fuck that. Unless I know I can put a team together.
Yeah. It's so fair. I think, Adrienne, Adrienne, you said something I forgot to put in. Do not say you can do something that you can't do as a strategist. Like, news travels fast. If there's a strategist that blows it on a project, people are going to like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. Like, your reputation is everything right now.
So you don't want to be the shit sandwich they remembered. Like, I wrote, it's just doesn't work well because nobody can forget what a shit sandwich tastes like. And if your face is tied to it, it's not awesome.
Sure.
I will just leave it at that. Yeah.
A quick question on your special sauce is what you were saying. And I really like that idea of like, don't be afraid to kind of own that one without diluting the rest of your skill set. Based on kind of what you're hiring for, what you've seen, would you say there's kind of a certain skill set that you'd probably consider more versatile than others? Does it look like research-based skill set, or does it look more kind of like an EQ-based skill set? Like, what skill set do you think would be kind of more versatile to stand out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think lately, the thing that I'm really looking for are people that can land the plane. And what I mean by that are people who can take the theory of brand strategy and then actually operationalize it. And a lot of times that you're not seeing that right now. You're seeing a lot of brand theorists, but not a lot of operators. And so for me, that being able to make that step is a really important step. And that's something I've been probing on a lot lately. I would expect that almost anyone who is somewhat senior can do consumer interviews, especially in this day and age where we can't go talk to people. So it's all over Zoom. I'm expecting you can do that. Ruben, I don't know your level, but as soon as you hit like strategist level, I'm expecting you can do cultural competitive audits. You can write a discussion guide. You can write a creative brief. You can go find some really juicy insights. But for me right now, again, repeating myself, that operational thing, sorry, I can't talk today. That thing that we do when we operate, that to me is golden. And not just seeing it operationalized into an ad campaign, but see it operationalized into like, and we went and made this thing. We went and did this thing. Like that to me is like, amazing.
Yeah, it's, that's really, really helpful just because I was I feel like most people, I was shifting into freelance just due to COVID. And one of these things that I was trying to figure out is like, out of all the skill sets that I have, what is the one that would kind of shine out the most? And going close to like 6 years of just working in different strategic spaces, I was like, okay, like, what do I have to show for it? And out of all that, like, what is that one skill that you're like, oh shit, that can be spun many different ways?
Yeah.
That's something that I was trying to flip between, like, okay, like when you were saying theorist from operational, like what does that look like, of just idea into action type of thing? Or
Yeah, it's like we had the strategy and we knew we had to fix the website right away, or we knew there were issues in the customer service journey, and so we fixed it. Like showing that right away. But let me also back up for a second and let me tell you what my spike was in the eras of my career. Like my spike in my 20s was, I'm a really good street strategist. Like you put me on a street anywhere, I'll feel the culture, I'll be able to understand really quickly like what's cool, what's not cool, those nuances that you need to connect with an audience. So for my 20s, street strategist was kind of my jam. Highly culturally tuned, highly street tuned, right? In my 30s, when I freelanced then, so that's what I interviewed with in my 20s, because I wasn't a freelancer in my 20s, but I freelanced in my 30s. And when I freelanced in my 30s, my thing was I can run teams. So you can bring me in, and I'm like, if you have a multi-dimensional team where you have like a complicated client, you have 4 different types of strategists that are coming in, I can run your teams. And that's what they did. And literally they'd be like, boop, here you go. And I like go off and run someone's team for them. Right now, when I'm doing Zwolf, the thing that I say that's my spike is like, I can solve problems with senior leaders. So senior leaders, C-suite, founders, executive directors, I understand what it's like to run a company. I understand what it's like to have internal issues, external issues. I understand the whole engagement ecosystem, and I understand what it means to be a leader, and you need to fix something so that your brand works again. I know how to do that. And so every era of my career, the spike has changed based on how I've evolved as a human and as a professional. Was that helpful, Ruben? Did that make sense?
that spike thing with the H was golden, and that will never, I can't unhear that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hi.
First a confession. I think I was one of those fools who said, "Yeah, I'm really good at telling brand stories."
No, I don't think so, Adam. But
now I know better. So thanks for that. No, I'm just playing. I guess my question is kind of about that T as well. I struggle sometimes because, I want to take on things that are outside my zone that I'm super interested in, and I want to be flexible. And it's like I have this sort of negotiation between that T, and I have like 2 T's maybe, but versus just like being open, right? But you don't want to seem like floppy generic, right?
Right.
Do you have any reflections on that process?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's just because you get called out as a freelancer. Like if you're like, I can do a comm strategy and you can't, and then you deliver it, you get a bad name. And freelancers, people check up on you as a freelancer. They're going to call around, especially now since the market is so competitive. So, there is something to be said. I used to say to clients, like, I don't do this, like what you want to hire me for. And they'd be like, that's fine, we'll teach you. Sometimes they'll do it. They'll teach you because they want you on the project, right? Other times I've asked friends who work in the area if I can intern for them for like a couple of weeks and just like ride shotgun on one of their projects so I can really understand how it works. So there are ways to get around it, but I do think just being honest, being like, this isn't the core of what I can do. I think I can figure it out, but I just want to be straight with you that this isn't like my bread and butter. And sometimes they go with you and sometimes they don't.
I am a freelance photographer, printer, and retoucher. And like, I just got to this place where like all of my clients come to me for the retouching, which is like fine, but it's like, it's a slog. And I just have so many other skills that I would love to get hired, whether it's like for a consulting basis, just to like come in and do like file organization or whatever. Like I have so many different skills and I just somehow ended up like in this one lane. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, like, I guess I get kind of nervous about just trying to like send out a mass email to like everyone I've ever worked with. And like, I don't know, what does that look like? How do you just like reach out to people and be like, hey, I also do X, Y, Z?
You could just say that, right? Like, this is what I do now. This is the kind of services. And yes, I'll do your retouching if you want, but this is the stuff that I'm really great at. And I've been doing it with a couple different people. It's always great to have some case study around that as well, so people really understand it. I'm going to take a little story time detour here because it's like one of the grounding stories of my career. So buckle up, everyone. Here we go. So when I started W&W, we got called by like a massive client, and we were at a point in W&W where cash flow was going to run out in like 4 weeks, and I didn't have anything in the new business pipeline. And this big ass, you all know the corporate, it's a huge corporation, came in and was like, we need a woman-run agency. So can you come and set this all up and do all this work for us? And the thing is that they wanted us to do advertising. And when I started W&W, I'm like, I don't want to do advertising anymore. I want to do upstream positioning, brand strategy, that kind of work. And I was really wrestling with this as like a private business owner. I was like, I have employees, I have payroll, I have insurance to pay, and we're going to be set for 3 years if I do this. Like, we're going to be good, but we're going to turn into the company that I always never wanted W&W to turn into. So I called a really good friend of mine, and I was stressing out, and I said, what do I do? And he gave me the best piece of advice. He said, you have to make room for the right things to come in. And if you say yes to the wrong things, there is no room for the right things to come in. And it was just this eye-opening thing for me. He's like, you'll say yes to it, and you think you're still going to get the phone calls asking you to do the thing that you really want to do, but something energetically in the universe is not going to is going to know that you've gotten distracted and like you're not doing what you really want to do. And it was this big like fuck moment for me, right? And so I called the massive client the day later, and I turned down the project. I called my team first, and I said, we might be out of business in a week, but like, we've always said that this isn't what we were going to do. So like, I have to like do this call, right? Called the client, told them, they were lovely, they got it. And then like literally 3 days later, the right phone call came through. And that happened like 5 times during W&W. It happened 5 times, like where we said no to the wrong thing in sometimes a financially precarious moment, and the phone call came through. It was weird. It was too regular to say that it was like coincidence, right? So that's just my little added layer of telling you what someone very wise told me once, is like, you got to make room for the right things to come in. And sometimes it means saying no to the things that you're really good at, but you're just not want to do anymore. They just don't want to do.
I was wondering what happens when a project terminates early. And if, what the expectation is there. I know obviously it's going to depend on terms, but
it's totally in your contract terms. A lot of times you'll want to put, there's usually terms that you get paid up for the work that you've done so far, and then 40% of the remaining fee or 60% of the remaining fee. That is something in your like, assume the worst, assume that the project will get canceled a month in. What will happen? And get those terms written into your contract.
I was wondering, so in freelance, I've had an instance, for example, where the company actually gave me a contract rather than me giving them. So in that kind of situation, how would you navigate that?
Yeah, this happens a lot. Like a lot of times when a company is working with a client, they have an MSR or MSA, excuse me. It's called a master services agreement that basically overrides any sort of contract that an agency would bring for engagement, right? So a lot of times the contract can come from either side, right? So if you're lucky and you can afford to have a lawyer on retainer, I like to have lawyers look at that stuff. If not, read every word of that contract. Do not sign anything that you don't read, or have a friend read it with you. It's perfectly fine to use someone else's contract as long as you agree with the language and what's in there.
Okay. And is it kind of just a follow-up to that? Is it normal or like okay to just kind of go back to that and kind of counter if there's something, even if it's like a standard thing, just say like, can this change basically?
Oh yeah, totally. It's called redlining. So here's some jargon for you. Here's some lawyery jargon. When someone gives you a contract and you don't agree with the language and you want to propose different language to it, number one, know that you, unless they're being generous, which they usually won't be, if you have something you want to change in the contract, they're not going to be like, okay, fine, we'll pay our lawyers to go change that language for you. You have to send them a red line. And what a red line is basically a document that has, it's almost like using suggestion on Word or in Google Docs, where you literally redline the piece of language that you're trying to change, and then in red, write the proposed counter language. And a lot of times red lines go back and forth quite a bit when you're getting to a final contract.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. How you doing?
Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
I have two questions. The first question is, so being out here in the Bay Area with all these tech companies, there's a lot of contracting opportunities, which is what I found slightly different from freelancing. And I feel like there's a bit of this idea that if you're contracting for a big tech company, and if your contract is for like 6 months, the expectation is that you as a contractor eventually want to convert to a full-time employee. And I've been in a scenario where I did not want to convert. I just wanted to be there for 6 months and then dip out. How do you, like, I'm just curious to know, like, what's your point of view on those types of roles, and do you advocate for people to take those types of positions, or just your thoughts? I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've taken those types of positions before and it was in the Bay. I was working for Google and I did that. I think it's just, you know what you're dealing with, right? And like, you don't have to re-up a contract. You never do. So don't ever feel pressure. This is the thing I say to people that drop out of agencies. I say this to people that are interacting with other companies. At the end of the day, and I know this is going to sound really harsh, but an agency will drop you, right? Like everyone's like, no, it's my family, it's my people. It's like, no, they're going to drop you. Like the companies don't care about you as much as you think they do. I know that sounds awful, right? So you are allowed to have a little bit like, well, you know what? You would drop my contract if it wasn't convenient for you. So it doesn't mean you're a dick about that or like that you're rude about it, but just know that like when you're a contractor, you owe them what you agreed to in the contract, and that's it, and nothing else.
Yeah.
And you can be really kind about that, but you don't have to feel guilted into anything more than what that contract says.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful, because I was in a situation where the expectation was, well, you're not going above and beyond. Like you're not like you're not really showing that you want to be here. And I'm just like, this is a contractor role.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You know.
I mean, there, and again, like, I don't know what happened with that and I have nothing to say, but like, what I will say is this for me goes back to the assassin thing, right? Like when I hire a freelancer in and I'm very clear about scope, deliverables and stuff like that, I expect them to like slay it, because this is my company and I'm hiring you and I'm probably paying you pretty well. So I expect you to come in and like show up every day. And I think that is something, actually, Lexi, I'm glad you brought this up. This is something that is a little bit different about freelance, right? Like when you're a freelancer, it doesn't matter if you broke up with your boyfriend. It doesn't matter if like you had a bad weekend and you didn't sleep last night. Like a lot of times companies and managers will have a bit more empathy for their full-time employees in that situation. A lot of times when it comes to freelancers, they don't give a shit. It's like, I am paying you to do this thing, right? So again, assassin mentality. Your job is to get in there and fucking slay and then get out, right? And the nice thing is, let me just put one more thing on, let me just one more thing. The nice thing about this is like what I found freelancing really liberating when I first started, because I didn't have to worry about interviewing people to hire for cultural fit. I didn't care that they didn't do the offsite at one location instead of another location when the rest of the company was bitching about it. Like all that stuff that you get enmeshed with a company, I was just like, I don't care. This isn't my company. And I could actually get my work done between 10 and 2 every day. Whereas at my old company, to get that amount of work done would take me between 8 and 7. Because it was just like, I'm just here to slay this thing and I'm out. And so I used to go in from 10 to 2 every day. Be like, I'm done. So there is something nice about it as long as you show up and as long as you just like hack through it and get it done.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. Can I ask my second question?
Yeah, of course.
Have you ever had an experience where you were engaging in a full-time conversation, but then converted that into a freelancing or consulting opportunity?
Yes.
So like flipping it.
Yes.
Any thoughts or tips around that?
I just tell them straight up, like, I'm not looking for full-time right now, but if you're looking to fill this gap quickly and I can even help you hire the next person, we can write that into my scope. You can bring me on. I can start tomorrow. You know, and a lot of times like, oh my God, we just need it filled. Like, just come in and help us for a few weeks, right? So again, I think a lot of this is about being really honest up front about where you're at. And then a lot of times, because people need the talent pretty deeply, I get hired to do like a month-long gig just to fill a gap while they're looking for the full-time person.
A conversation with the person making the hiring versus like a recruiter, correct?
That's a good, I don't want the recruiter to look bad, because you don't want to piss off recruiters. You don't want to piss off anybody when you're a freelancer, really. You don't. So you can offer that up to the recruiter. You can say, look, I'm not doing full-time, but a lot of times this is how it goes. And I'm happy to have that conversation with the client. And a lot of times recruiters will still put you in front of the client with that.
I'm wondering if you have any sort of reflections on if when you start kind of, when you engage with an agency and you understand the project scope, you know the timeline, and then you're feeling very comfortable about, like, if you were to be brought onboarded like the next day, you know that you can deliver, you know, quality work, given the timeline that they've presented to you. But oftentimes I find that the agencies like disappear for a week or two, and then they bring you on maybe a week before the deadline, and then you're expected to basically deliver the same quality work as you would if you had like a month versus like a week.
Right.
How do you handle that?
This is another mantra that we preached at W&W. I still preach it here and every day. The facts are neutral, right? So if you were going to bring me on for a project for a month, but you're only going to bring me on for a week, the fact is I'm not going to be able to deliver the same way that I could have if I was in for a month. I'm happy to do this much work. I'm happy to try, but this is what I think I'll be able to deliver. And I think like this is the thing with negotiating, with scope changes, with the conversations that I used to feel really uncomfortable around. I used to feel really uncomfortable about money conversations. I used to feel very uncomfortable about scope changes. I didn't want anyone to dislike me. I didn't want anyone to think that I was difficult. As soon as I got that mantra in my head that the facts are neutral, it really helped me. It helped recenter me. So like, okay, scope change. The fact is that's going to cost you more money. And like, just because you're taking more of my time. And I think if you're very reasonable about it, people actually get it.
Got it.
Tina, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to jump in that I hate the question, like, well, how many weeks is it going to take you to do X? And like my flip answer is always like, as long as you'll give me.
I'm curious to know how important you feel liability insurance is as a freelancer.
I never had it as a freelancer. I've always had it for my LLCs, or like business insurance and business liability.
Like E&O.
Yeah, I never did it as a freelancer. It tends to be, I do it when like I'm building teams around me. So like what I do now is I have Zoll Strategy, which is basically my consultancy. It is an LLC that allows me to deal with clients' procurement departments because they like to see an LLC. They like to see a legal entity, not just a individual social. And it also gives me the infrastructure that I can pay other people in the teams. As soon as I get to that level, you get all the liability, you get the insurance, you get that kind of stuff. When I've done like freestyle assassin freelancing, which is what I did when I was in my 30s, I didn't have that kind of stuff. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. It just feels slightly overkill to pay all that stuff when you're just like a singular hired hand.
I have my own clients as opposed to working within agencies. Mm-hmm. And I see a very marked difference in like attitudes and how I have to show up compared to an agency, because agencies get it, they know it. Do you find there's a lot more with independent individual clients? There's a lot more upfront work that you'd have to do, a lot more education where it's free and you're not charging. And how do you navigate that without it giving too much away without getting the feedback?
Sure. I think that's a really great question. And that's something that I've run into a lot, especially with startup clients who don't have sophisticated marketing departments yet. and their head of marketing is probably somebody that understands SEO better than understands brand, right? We used to have a document at W&W, I still have a version of it. It's Wolf. It was called the Day One. And it was basically a question of like, what's your problem? What are you trying to, what is success? Who are you trying to talk to? And it was basically having a client write a brief for us. And then once they would write the Day One, and we also put how much money can you spend on this project? So we weren't like redesigning something terribly. Then we would make sure they were all clear on the Day One, which a classic client you don't have to do because they know how to write a marketing brief. And then once they did the Day One, then we would write the proposal for them. And that was the extent of how much I would quote unquote give away before starting to work for a client under a paid scope. Are you finding that you're having to give away more before you start working?
Yeah, I think it's more of an education piece. It's not necessarily that I'm giving away skills or strategic advice. It's just their knowledge is so low that it just takes a lot of legwork. Yeah. And I'm fairly new to own client freelancing, and it's just so markedly different. But I was just wondering if I've just not got lucky with my clients.
No, I think there are certainly like a band of clients where that education is really needed, and where you need to set the tone of like, this is how it works. This is what feedback is, right? Like so they're definitely like, not all direct to clients are like that, but especially if you're dealing like, again, smaller companies, startups, things like that, I run into that a lot there. And basically I just set the rules. I'm like, this is how it's going to work. It's kind of nice in some ways because they don't have any rules in place as to how they do it. So it can kind of be a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, it's really nice to be able to flex that. Like, I'm the consultant, I'm going to control what's going on. So that's really nice, but it does have the downsides of extra legwork.
Definitely. Yeah.
So to the topic that you were speaking to earlier, about, getting paid what you're worth, I'm finding that it's a lot easier for me to find those smaller clients whom I really want to help, but their budgets just, yeah.
Yep.
Any advice on breaking into the bigger brands? Like, yeah. I just think like bigger brands are so used to working with these like fancy consultancies and agencies. So like, I'm this solo person coming and knocking on the door. Like, do they even work with freelancers?
They do. It's not as it's not as common. And when I first started freelancing, the first time I started freelancing I was like 31, and I only freelanced to agencies. I didn't freelance to clients because I didn't believe that they would want to work with me. Right. It's a little tricky. I mean, like, they do want to work with individuals. It's not that they don't, it's that they just don't know you. Right. And when they go to like try to fix something, they have like the same slate that everyone else has. So they're like, oh, well, we better call Droga. So, I mean, everyone calls, you know what I mean? Like, because there's just a lack of imagination, and there's also a lack of PR because we don't have our PR things. Like, we don't pay to be at the top of those lists like a lot of the agencies do. Like, I mean, newsflash, all of those lists about the best agencies and stuff like that, that's a PR play. Like, that is not like because they actually are the best places. They just have the right PR companies that do that, right? So it's like, how do you break through that? And a couple of ways you can do it is like, when a friend goes client side, like, make sure your friend knows, like, this is what I do. This is where the network thing comes into play, right? Because there is so much porousness between the industry and client side, like, make sure you're tracking when friends go client side. Something that I think helps with procurement and helps with clients taking you seriously is having a website and an LLC so that they know they're working with an entity. Like, that makes them feel better. As soon as I got the entity of W&W, client business started coming in, and we just put up like a Squarespace website. But having that simplistic website makes a big difference, and putting a brand name on it. Right? Like, Zwolf's strategy is essentially me and now this freelance network, and I can take on big projects if I need to, but essentially it's a coding for me, right? There's nothing that Zwolf does that Heidi Hackemer can't do, but it's the shell that allows me to put a philosophy out into the world. And clients will hire smaller shops because they are looking for a different point of view. They're looking for something interesting. And so if you can figure out what your coding is and what your point of view is, then, you can attract clients like that, but it takes time.
I had a quick question about do you pursue cold calling? What's your opinion on that? And what's been your experience as an employer with cold calls?
That's a really good question. Cold calling isn't always bad if it's tailored. I think untailored cold calling is awful. Like when I can tell that I'm on a copy and paste email, drives me crazy. But if somebody's taken the time, look, there's plenty of shit about me online, right? So if you've taken the time to listen to one of my podcasts or, dig into some of my Medium posts and then write me a thoughtful note about how we could work together, then yeah, I'm cool with it, So I would just say you can tell when the form letter is coming through and don't indulge in the form letter.
I think one of the things you mentioned something when you were talking about your sort of trajectory through 20s and 30s and 40s. And I think you had said in your 30s, you talked a lot or positioned yourself a lot about as someone who could come in and lead a team.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is something that's never actually crossed my mind as I'm considering becoming a freelancer, is this idea of not being this sort of singular assassin type entity, but potentially having to lead a team. And I'm just kind of curious, is that something that often happens as a freelancer? Is that often an expectation that will come with being a freelancer, or does it maybe depend on the level that you're coming in at?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there definitely is. It's happened to me at multiple agencies where a client comes in, the client needs to be taken care of. They don't have someone that's director level that has the bandwidth to do it. And they just say, hey, we just need someone to run this account. We need someone to take on this project. And we need somebody that can make sure that our younger strategists feel cared for and they're not banging on HR's door, and that can work with the creative teams well. And yeah, so it is actually something. I got a lot of gigs positioning myself as that. Sometimes I think I should go back to positioning myself as that, because it's a great way to position yourself. And I think one way to think about it is to the earlier conversation, there are definite holes in agencies right now because so much talent does not want to be in agency walls anymore, especially as you get older, right? There's this youthful rush to the agencies, oh, I'm going to get my first job. I'm going to do everything. And everyone's excited for the first 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, maybe. And then the reality of this lifestyle sets in for a lot of people. And I think you see, all the best strategy directors I know do not work for agencies anymore. They just don't. Why would they put up with it? They don't need to. So especially as you get more senior, there's those holes in the departments and you can fill those holes. So part of it is knowing where talent is leaking out, because it's not that the demand always goes away. It's just the talent leaks out. So how can you fill some of that demand?
I was just going to say, you said you wanted to be the captain of your own growth in regards to projects and different things like that. But outside of that, how would you manage your growth other than just managing, oh, I want to work on these type of projects, but since you really wouldn't have a senior director or like you were saying, because I feel like I'm very much on the cusp of going on 6 years of this type of work. I'm okay, shit, where, how do I manage my own growth now? What does that look like? I've managed a couple people. The first gig I had was a really large team that I was so unqualified for that I just kind of jumped into it because it was a startup and the person believed in me, which was dope. But other than that, I was where would I get my learnings from other than things like this? And what does that growth look like?
That's a good question. Look, when I freelanced at Anomaly for a while, I became really good friends and learned so much from Johnny Vulcan, who was one of the founding partners of Anomaly, because I was going in as a director level, but I still knew I had a shit ton to learn, and Johnny was there, right? When I was freelancing at Droga, it was Johnny Bauer, the Johnnies. So it's when you're freelancing, yes, you're not going to get coddled and loved, and you're not going to be brought into the department, but you can still learn a lot by the agencies you're surrounding yourself by and the people you're surrounding yourself by. And I don't think I could have ever started W&W had I not had this freelance run through a bunch of different companies, because there were a lot of leaders that I learned from very quickly. There were a lot of structures that I saw in play and how things worked. And it was a very good primer of like, well, if I were to build it, this is what I would want to build, right? So a lot of times it's like what environments you're going to put yourself into, and because like once you are kind of ingrained, then it's like, yeah, go get coffee with someone, go have lunch with somebody, get to know somebody there, you know? So I think there are ways to learn through freelancing. When I say like be the captain of your own learning, unlike an agency situation where like when I worked at W&W, everyone would come to me and be like, what's my growth plan? Right? Like, so it's a whole other topic for another supper club about who controls your growth plan. But like that was more of an expectation that I had to make sure that, you know, employee X had their plan. That's you can't expect that from people, but you can still learn them as resources to learn. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.